My uncle's hand struck my face so hard. My ears rang. The guests gasped, then went silent. No one moved. No one dared. The chapel blurred, stone arches, candlelight, the pale curve of stained glass, then steadied again while the pain stayed bright and hot under my skin. My cheek throbbed like a warning bell. When I swallowed, I tasted iron. Someone gasped. A few hands flew to mouths in the pews. And then the room did what it always did for him. It went silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Not a single voice rose to name what just happened. The guests stared as if my humiliation was part of the ceremony, another ritual, another vow I hadn't agreed to. I sat rigid in the carved chair at the front, lace pulled in my lap, white sleeves hiding the tremor in my arms. Behind me, my uncle's fingers clamped my shoulder, tight enough to remind me he could steer me like a thing with no will. He leaned over me and pointed into the crowd, accusing the room with his finger while keeping his grip on my body. "Witness her," he said, loud and cold. "Witness what happens when she forgets who owns her obedience." My groom stood a few steps away. Tavern Holt didn't come to me. He didn't defend me. He didn't even meet my eyes. He looked down, like the floor was safer than my face. That was when it hit me harder than the slap. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transfer. I wasn't being loved. I was being delivered. Merrick's hand lifted again. Slower this time. Measured. A second strike raised like a lesson meant for everyone to memorize. My lungs locked. My fingers curled into the fabric in my lap. I forced my chin to stay up as I braced for the next blow. It never landed. The doors at the back of the chapel blew open so violently the candle flames jerked sideways. A pressure rolled down the aisle, thick, ancient, territorial, followed by thunder that didn't belong to the sky. A man filled the doorway. He walked in like the building had been waiting to make room for him. His voice didn't shout. It didn't need to. "Touch her again," he said, calm as winter, "and you will not leave this place alive." Merrick's raised hand dropped, not slowly, not politely, just fell, as if his body had forgotten how to disobey a higher law. Every head turned. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the chapter where everything unravels. The room stopped being Merrick's. And then the stranger's gaze found me, straight through the bruise blooming across my cheek, straight through the white dress, straight through the lie they'd dressed me in. Not curiosity. Recognition. Caelric Thorn. The alpha king of the northern packs, half myth, wholly feared, looked at me like this moment had been coming for a long time. Something in my chest tightened, sharp and instinctive, like an old chain snapping taut. Before my uncle's finger pointed me out like a criminal, before the chapel went silent for him, before Caelric Thorn shattered my wedding with a single sentence, I still believed the vain name was the only cage I'd ever have to survive. I used to think cages were made of iron. Bars. Locks. Chains you could see. But House Bane didn't need any of that. Our cages were built from manners and laws and smiling threats delivered over dinner. From servants who wouldn't meet your eyes. From elders who called cruelty discipline because the word sounded cleaner in a prayer hall. And from one man who wore my family's crest like a crown he'd stolen. Marek Vane. My uncle. My legal guardian. The reason my life could be arranged, signed, traded, without anyone ever asking what I wanted. It started the year the house went quiet. The year my father stopped coming home. The year my mother's laughter disappeared from the corridors and the servants began speaking in careful tones, as if noise might break something already cracked. No one told me the truth at first. Not directly. They said accident. They said hunting trip. They said misfortune. But there's a certain kind of silence that doesn't belong to accidents. A certain way people avoid your eyes when the thing that happened was done on purpose. My parents didn't simply die. They were removed. And in the space they left behind, Marek stepped in like he'd been waiting at the edge of the room the whole time. He came with papers. With seals. With the council's blessing. With a new lock on my bedroom door and a new rule for how long I could stand by the window. He didn't raise his voice often in those early days. He didn't need to. He learned quickly what frightened people more than shouting. Certainty. "You're vain," he told me the first night he took control of the estate, his hand resting on the mantle like the entire house belonged to his palm. "Which means you're a responsibility. Not a person." I remember staring at him, trying to recognize anything familiar in the hard cut of his mouth, the expensive wool of his coat, the silver threading at his cuffs. I remember thinking, he's family. Family doesn't talk like that. Then he smiled like he could hear the thought. "That's what makes it easy," he said softly. "You'll keep waiting for kindness I'm not going to give." After that, the house became a lesson. Marek's lessons were never taught once. They were taught until you learned them in your bones. Obedience, first. Not the dramatic kind. Not kneeling, not chains. Small obediences that stacked into a wall. Speak when spoken to. Don't argue in front of servants. Don't leave the grounds without escort. Don't ask about your parents. And the one rule that mattered more than the rest. Don't make him look weak. Because weakness in our world didn't just invite ridicule. It invited blood. House Vanes sat at the border of 3 territories, balanced on old agreements and older grudges. We weren't the strongest pack. We weren't the richest. What we had was position, a narrow strip of land everyone wanted to control. My father had kept that position by being careful. Marek kept it by being feared. He hosted council dinners where men laughed too loudly and women held their smiles like masks. He shook hands with rival alphas and let them think he respected them, while his eyes measured what they'd cost to bury. He spoke about alliances the way other men spoke about weather. Unavoidable. Impersonal. Necessary. And eventually, inevitably, he began speaking about me. At first it was subtle. A comment about my future. A compliment delivered like a warning, pretty enough to soften negotiations. A hand at the back of my neck guiding me into rooms I didn't want to enter. Then the day came when subtlety died. It was winter. The kind of winter that turned the world sharp and brittle. The windows were iced at the edges. The corridors smelled of smoke and pine resin. Marek called me into the study after dinner. He didn't offer me a chair. He didn't offer me warmth. He laid a parchment on the desk between us like a blade. "You're to marry Tavern Holt," he said. I stared at the paper until the ink blurred. "I don't know him." "You don't need to. He's not vain. He's useful." That word, useful, landed in my stomach and stayed there. I had heard the name Holt before. Everyone had. House Holt wasn't beloved, but it was stable. Wealthy. quietly influential. The kind of pack that survived by making sure it was never the first to bleed. Tavern Holt was the second son, which meant he wasn't the heir. But he still carried enough status to matter. And Marek needed matter. He needed a bridge. He needed a contract that walked and breathed and smiled politely in public. He needed me. I won't, I said before I could stop myself. Marek's gaze lifted. Not surprised. Not angry. Just interested, like he'd been waiting to see if I still had enough spirit to entertain him. You will, he replied, calm as a locked door. Because you're not refusing me. You're refusing the council. That's not true. He leaned forward, and for a moment his face softened into something almost fatherly. Almost. The council can dissolve House Vane if it becomes unstable, he said gently. They can seize our land. They can split our territory between rivals who will gut every loyal family that lives here. You want that on your conscience? My throat tightened. I hated that he spoke like a savior while tightening the noose. You're using them, I whispered. He smiled again. They're using me, he corrected. And I'm using you. That's how it works. I left the study shaking. Not because I'd been yelled at. Because I hadn't. Because Marek didn't need anger to control me. He only needed to remind me that every path away from him was lined with consequences that would spill onto other people. He turned my empathy into a chain. And the house helped him. The servants began preparing me like a possession being polished. Dresses appeared in my wardrobe, white, cream, pale silver. The colors of surrender. The colors of someone who was meant to look pure while being traded. A seamstress measured my waist and spoke about lace as if it mattered more than my breath. An older woman brought oils for my skin and spoke in a low voice about appearing calm. They talked about Tavern as if he were weathered too. He's respectable. He won't be cruel. He won't embarrass you. No one said, will he love you? No one said, do you want him? Those were childish questions in a world built on bloodlines and territory. I met Tavern Holt for the first time 2 weeks before the ceremony. Marek arranged it like a negotiation. Of course he did. A dinner table long enough to feel like a divide. Candles and silver holders. Guards in the corners. Tavern arrived in black, his hair neatly combed, his posture flawless. He bowed politely to Marek first. Only then did his eyes flick to me. They didn't hold. They didn't sharpen with interest. They passed over me like I was part of the furniture. I'm honored, he said, voice even. House Vane and House Holt will be stronger together. Not I'm honored to meet you. Not how do you feel about this? Just the script. He was handsome in the way paintings are handsome. Correct. Controlled. Empty of warmth. During dinner, he spoke about trade routes and border patrols. About future stability. About ensuring peace. He never asked what I liked. Never asked what I feared. Never asked whether I'd slept in weeks. When I tried to speak, when I let a question slip out about my own life, Marek's hand tapped once against his glass. A small sound. A warning. Tavern's gaze lowered immediately. And I understood something then that hurt almost as much as the slap would later. Tavern wasn't going to hurt me himself. But he wasn't going to stop anyone else from doing it either. He was marrying me the way he'd sign a treaty. To avoid conflict. To keep his hands clean. To stay alive. After he left, I stood in the corridor and watched his carriage disappear into the snow. A thought came, sharp and stupid with hope. Maybe I can run. It lasted all of 3 heartbeats. Merrick's voice drifted behind me. If you run, they'll hunt you. I turned. He was leaning in the doorway like he'd been there the whole time. If they catch you, he continued, almost conversational, the council will call you unstable. They'll call Housebane unstable. And then they'll come for everyone who swears loyalty to our crest. His gaze slid over my face like a blade testing the edge. You won't do that to them, he said. You're too soft. I hated him for knowing me. I hated myself for proving him right. In the days that followed, the world narrowed until it was nothing but preparation. My freedom shrank by inches. A guard outside my door. A maid who never left the room when she dressed me. A new bracelet at my wrist, silver, etched with old runes that made my skin itch when I touched the clasp. It wasn't a shackle. It was worse. It was something I could explain away if anyone asked. A family heirloom. A wedding tradition. A protective charm. But I could feel it. Every time I tried to step past the estate gates, nausea rolled through me. My wolf, quiet as it was, buried as it had become under years of compliance, pressed against my ribs like it wanted to bite. The bracelet's runes stayed cold. Held. Contained. Marek didn't want me gone. He wanted me delivered intact. And somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the dinners, the preparations, the polite lies, I started noticing things I couldn't explain. The way my skin prickled sometimes, like the air had teeth. The way I'd wake from dreams with my heart racing, the scent of pine and smoke trapped in my throat as if someone had been standing too close. The way the wind would change direction and I'd feel watched. Not by guards. Not by Marek. By something farther. Wilder. A presence that didn't belong to Housebane at all. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself it was fear. I told myself anything that allowed me to stay sane. Then the wedding day arrived. They dressed me early, before the sun had fully risen. They pinned my hair back with small silver combs that scratched my scalp. They laced my sleeves tight enough to keep my hands steady. White lace. White silk. A costume of innocence. Marek entered my room while the maid adjusted my veil. He looked at me like he was inspecting merchandise. This is the last time you'll embarrass me, he said quietly. Smile today. Speak when spoken to. And you will have a comfortable life. Comfortable. As if comfort could replace freedom. As if comfort could erase the fact that my life was being handed over like a parcel. He offered me his arm. Not like a father. Like a captor escorting a prisoner. We walked the corridors of the estate and into the waiting carriage. The world outside was gray, cold, unmoving. Snow dusted the hedges like ash. The chapel stood at the end of the road, stone and shadow, old enough to remember blood oaths spoken in wolf tongue. Inside, the guests gathered. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and perfume and fear. They sat me in the carved chair at the front to rest before the vows, another tradition, another excuse to keep me still. Marek stood behind me, hand on my shoulder. Tavern waited near the aisle, immaculate, distant. And I remember thinking, right before everything broke. If this is the worst fate waiting for me, then I can survive it. Then Marek leaned close, felt the tension in my body, and decided to make an example. His finger lifted. His voice sharpened. And the chapel learned what house vein discipline looked like when it was performed for an audience. That was when his palm snapped across my face. That was when the room went silent. That was when my wedding stopped being a ceremony, and became a spectacle meant to teach me obedience. And that was when the doors at the back of the chapel decided they'd had enough. The doors didn't open. They gave up. Would split with a crack like bone, iron hinges shrieking as if the chapel itself had been forced to kneel. Wind poured down the aisle, cold and sharp, scattering candle flames sideways. The air thickened, heavy with something that wasn't weather. It was presence. A silhouette filled the ruined doorway, framed by gray daylight and drifting snow. He stepped inside without hurry. Not a soldier entering enemy ground. Not a guest arriving late. A king returning to a place that had forgotten it belonged to him. I felt it before my mind could name it, my wolf stirring under years of suppression, pressing against my ribs like it had been asleep and someone had spoken its true name. The bracelet at my wrist went icy. Behind me, Marek's grip tightened, then faltered, like his hand couldn't decide whether to hold harder or let go. The man who entered wore dark clothes that drank the light. No insignia. No ceremonial crown. Yet the entire room shifted around him as if the crown was simply assumed. His gaze cut through the chapel and found Marek first. Then it slid, slow, deliberate, and landed on me. My skin prickled as if I'd stepped too close to a flame. His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. "Strike her again," he said, calm as a blade laid on a table, "and you will not leave this place alive." The words weren't a threat. They were an outcome. Marek's raised hand dropped like the string holding him upright had been severed. Not in surrender. In reflex. His fingers twitched once, uselessly, as if his body had forgotten how to be brave. No one spoke. No one breathed too loud. Even Tavern Holt, standing near the aisle, immaculate in black, went still, his face blank with the kind of fear he'd never learned to hide. The Alpha King stepped closer. Each footfall was soft, but the weight behind it pressed into the stone. His attention didn't bounce around the room. He didn't need to measure the guests, or calculate the exits. He already owned the moment. My throat tightened as he stopped just far enough away to make it clear he wasn't asking permission to be near me. "Stand," he said. Not gently. Not cruelly. Like a command given to the world. I didn't move at first. Not because I refused, but because my body didn't know what kind of punishment followed disobedience when the one speaking wasn't Marek. Kilrick's eyes didn't flicker. "You're leaving," he added. "Now." Marek found his voice, thin, too loud in the silence. "You have no right." Kilrick turned his head a fraction. That was all. But Marek stopped speaking the way a dog stops barking when it sees the wolf. "I am ending this," Kilrick said, still looking at Marek, "before your cruelty becomes a war you can't survive." He reached out, only once, and took my wrist. Not tight enough to bruise. Not soft enough to feel safe. Just certain. The bracelet's runes seemed to react to his touch, a cold pulse under my skin. My breath hitched. Kilrick didn't comment. He didn't look down. As if he'd expected it. He guided me forward. Not dragging. Not carrying. Making it clear that if I wanted to stay, I'd have to fight him for the privilege of returning to my cage. I walked. Past the pews, past the guests frozen in their expensive silence, past the women clutching their hands like prayer could erase what they'd witnessed. Past Tavern. He didn't step in front of us. He didn't reach for me. His eyes didn't even follow my face. He stared at Kaelric with the same expression he'd worn all month, careful, empty, compliant. In that moment, I hated him more than I hated Marek. Marek's cruelty was honest. Tavern's was cowardice dressed as politeness. Kaelric led me out through the broken doors. Cold air struck my bruised cheek like a second slap. Snow swirled in the wind. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down like a lid. Outside, men stood in a loose formation, Kaelric's guards. Broad-shouldered, silent, dressed in dark coats. They didn't leer. They didn't smirk. They didn't look at me like prey. They looked at me like something fragile that could still be dangerous. Respect. And distance. A strange combination that didn't feel like freedom, only like a different kind of rule. A carriage waited beyond the chapel steps, black and severe. Horses stamped impatiently, breath steaming in the cold. No one shoved me toward it. No one bound my hands. Kaelric didn't say, "Get in." He simply opened the door. I climbed inside because every eye was still on us, and I refused to stumble now. Not in front of Marek. Not in front of Tavern. Not in front of the guests who'd watched me bleed and called it tradition. Kaelric entered after me, sitting across, not beside. A small mercy. Or a calculated distance. The door shut. The carriage rolled forward. And with each turning wheel, the chapel, my wedding, my humiliation, my family's cage, fell away behind us into the snow. For several minutes, only the sound of hooves and wind filled the space. Kaelric's guards rode outside, keeping pace. Their presence was constant but not suffocating, like a perimeter drawn without touching me. I pressed my bruised cheek with my fingertips and tasted blood again when my tongue found a cut inside my mouth. Kaelric watched the movement once. His eyes narrowed, not with pity, not with rage, but with the stillness of someone cataloging damage. "You're hurt," he said. It wasn't a question. It also wasn't comfort. "Yes," I managed. My voice sounded wrong, scraped thin by adrenaline. "That tends to happen when someone hits you." He didn't react to the bite in my tone. "You'll be treated when we arrive." "Where is that?" His gaze turned to the window, to the blur of snow-swept trees. "My territory." The words should have meant nothing. They landed like a sentence. I swallowed. "You can't just take me." Kaelric's attention returned to me slowly. "I already did." Anger flared through my fear, hot and reckless. "You interrupted a legal union." "A forced transfer," he cut in, voice still even. "A ceremony performed under coercion is void." "You don't know what." "I know enough." His eyes held mine, unblinking. "Marek Vane no longer has claim on you." Relief hit first. Immediate. Undeniable. Then dread followed like a shadow. "No longer has claim," I repeated, careful. "That implies someone else does." Kaelric's jaw tightened once, almost imperceptible. "My intervention has consequences," he said. "For him," I snapped. Not for you. For both of us. His voice lowered, not in threat, but in gravity. You don't understand what you are standing in the center of. I laughed, sharp and bitter. I understand exactly what I am. I'm a bargaining chip. I'm a crest. I'm a piece of land with a heartbeat. Something flickered in his eyes then. Not anger. Restraint. You were that, he said. You won't be again. The carriage hit a bump. My body jolted, pain flaring across my cheek. Kilrick's hands clenched on his knee, knuckles whitening. As if he wanted to break something. As if he was forcing himself not to. The trees thickened outside the window. The road narrowed. Snow fell harder, the world turning white and blurred. The air changed too, less smoke, less human perfume, more pine, more earth. More wolf. My bracelet cooled again, a pulse of cold that ran up my arm. Kilrick's gaze dropped to it, and for the first time his composure shifted. Not lost, never lost, but tightened, like a man bracing against a rope pulling from inside his own chest. Take that off, I said, suddenly desperate. Something is wrong with it. It's binding you, he answered, as if the truth were obvious. My breath caught. You do know. I've known since the moment I smelled it on you. Smelled. The word shouldn't have been intimate. It was. I stared at him, heart hammering. Then why didn't you? Why wait until my wedding day? Kilrick leaned back slightly, eyes dark. Because until today, you were surrounded. Guarded. Hidden behind laws and walls. I couldn't take you without starting a war before I understood what Marek had done to you. You couldn't, I echoed, bitter. Or you wouldn't. His mouth tightened, as if that distinction mattered more than he wanted it to. I've been tracking a dormant bond, he said at last, voice low. A thread that shouldn't exist in a body that's been suppressed. My skin went cold. Bond. He didn't say mate. He didn't say mine. He said it like a fact he disliked. You're rare, he continued, and something in his tone turned almost dangerous, like he resented the word. And you've been kept quiet on purpose. My mind spun. You're talking like I'm some. Like you're a target, he said bluntly. Silence filled the carriage again, heavier now. Outside, a stone marker passed, etched with symbols I didn't recognize, half buried in snow. The guards outside shifted subtly, a change in formation that felt practiced. We crossed something unseen. A line. A boundary. The air snapped colder, but cleaner. The forest grew denser. The world felt older. Kilrick's territory. I tried to steady my breathing. If I'm a target, then you're not helping by kidnapping me. His gaze sharpened. If I'd left you there, Marek would have married you off, bred you into someone else's line, and used you as leverage until you broke. My stomach twisted. So you took me instead. Kilrick's eyes held mine. Yes. And what does that make you? For the first time, something like fatigue touched his expression. Not physical, control fatigue. The kind that came from holding a beast on a chain. It makes me responsible, he said. For saving me? For stopping him. His voice went colder. Don't confuse the two. My hands clenched in my lap. I didn't ask you to do this. I know. Then give me a choice. Kaelric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone was measured, precise, each word placed like a stone in a wall. You will not be returned to Marek Vane. A door slammed shut in my chest. You will not be forced, he continued, and his eyes did something strange as he said it, tightened, almost pained. Not by me. Not by anyone under my command. Another door opened, narrow, cautious. You will be watched. There it was. The chain. Different metal. For how long? I demanded. Kaelric's gaze didn't waver. Until I'm certain you're safe. Safe from Marek? Safe from what he was preparing you for, Kaelric corrected. Safe from what others will come to claim once they realize you've been moved. The carriage slowed. Through the window I saw dark shapes ahead, gates, torches, the outline of a keep set into the forest like it had grown there. His home. His rules. My new cage, if I wasn't careful. I forced my voice steady. So I'm not property. Kaelric's jaw flexed. No, he said, and the word sounded like it cost him something. But I'm not free. A pause. Not yet, he admitted. The carriage stopped. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Kaelric stood first and offered his hand, not to pull, but to steady. I stared at it. At the restraint in the gesture. At the control it took not to simply take. I didn't take his hand. I stepped down on my own. Snow crunched under my shoes. The guards turned their eyes away slightly, not fully, but enough to give me the smallest illusion of privacy. Respect, again. Distance, again. Kaelric came to stand beside me. Close enough that I could feel heat from him, smell the faint bite of winter and smoke that clung to his coat. He looked ahead at the keep, then down at me. And for one heartbeat, the mask slipped. Not into softness. Into conflict. Like something inside him wanted to press me to the wall, mark me, claim me, end the uncertainty with dominance, and something else, something harder, was forcing that instinct to stay caged. He was fighting himself. And somehow that frightened me more than Marek ever had. Because Marek's cruelty was predictable. Kaelric's restraint was a choice. And choices could change. As the gates opened and we stepped into his territory, I made my own choice, quiet, internal, sharp as a knife drawn under a cloak. If survival here required obedience, I'd die. So I would do what I'd never been allowed to do in House Vane. I would watch. I would learn. I would plan. Because the Alpha King wasn't pretending to be my savior. He was telling me the truth. The wedding was void. Marek's claim was broken. But the cost of Kaelric Thorne's intervention hadn't been paid yet. And I could feel it in the way the cold air tightened around us. In the way my bracelet pulsed like a warning. In the way Kaelric's control held, barely, like a fist around a blade. The cage had changed. Now I had to become someone who could pick the lock. The cage had changed. That didn't mean it had disappeared. In Kaelric Thorne's keep, days passed in measured silence, stone corridors, iron braziers, guards who watched without staring, servants who spoke only when spoken to. No one called me property. No one touched me without permission. And still, every door had a watcher. Not to trap me, I told myself. To protect what I apparently was. The bruising on my cheek faded from crimson to sickly gold. The cut inside my mouth healed. The bracelet stayed, because no one could remove it without the right tools, the right knowledge, the right risk. Kaelric's healer examined it once, face pale, then refused to meet my eyes. Old binding, she muttered. Council-grade work. Kaelric said nothing. But his hands clenched at his sides until his knuckles went white, as if fury was a substance he had to physically contain. He still didn't touch me. Not once. Not even when the bond, whatever it was, tightened between us like invisible thread. I felt it in the quiet moments, when my breath hitched for no reason. When my wolf pressed against my ribs, restless. When Kaelric entered a room and the air changed, heavy with the knowledge of him. He stayed at a distance that felt deliberate. Restraint as a wall. And then the past arrived at the gate. It came on the back of a messenger wolf, mud-splattered, panting, eyes wide with urgency. The guard who brought the message didn't speak in the corridor. He waited until Kaelric was in the war room, where maps and old treaties covered the table like wounds you couldn't stitch closed. Kaelric read the message once. Then again. The temperature in the room dropped. What? I asked, because my life had taught me that silence was a weapon used to keep you small. Kaelric's gaze lifted to me. Controlled. Deliberate. Marek Vane has filed a challenge, he said. Not to you. To me. My stomach turned over. He can do that? He can try. And Tavern? Kaelric's eyes hardened slightly. Tavern Holt has declared he was robbed. He wants his bride returned. He's demanding compensation for humiliation. The words hit like a slap all over again. His bride. As if I'd been a ring on his finger that someone had stolen. I felt my wolf bare its teeth inside me, an instinctive, savage recoil. Kaelric watched my face, cataloging, calculating. You're shaking, he noted. I'm angry, I corrected, voice tight. And I'm not hiding from them. The guard shifted uneasily, as if waiting for Kaelric to deny me. Kaelric didn't. He held my gaze for a long moment, something unreadable tightening at the corners of his eyes. You want to face them, he said. Yes. I can deny their petition, he warned. I can make this disappear without you ever seeing him again. You can't make it disappear for me, I said, sharper than I intended. You can silence him. You can punish him. But you can't erase what he did. And I'm done being erased. The room held its breath. Kaelric's jaw flexed once. Then he nodded, a small movement that felt like a door unlocking. Then you will face them, he said. On my terms. What are your terms? His voice was calm. That calm was a blade. They enter my territory as petitioners, not equals. They speak when permitted. They leave when I decide. His gaze did not soften. And if either of them attempts to claim you with word or hand, they will learn what it means to insult a king. A shiver ran through me, not of fear of him. Of the inevitability he kept warning me about. Kaelric looked to the guard. Bring them at dusk. Public hall. The guard bowed and left. When the door shut, Kaelric's attention returned to me. You don't owe them performance, he said. I don't owe them silence either. A pause. Something in his expression shifted, almost approval, quickly buried. We're what you want, he added. Not white. My mouth went dry. It was such a small thing. And it felt like rebellion. Dusk turned the sky into bruised slate. Torches lit the great hall, Kaelric's hall, carved from dark stone and old victories. Wolves lined the edges in human form, silent, watchful. Not a wedding crowd. A pack. There was no altar. Only a raised dais at the far end, a seat that wasn't gilded, wasn't ornate, just solid stone that said power did not need decoration to be understood. Kaelric stood beside it, not seated yet, hands behind his back. He wore black, as always, but tonight it looked like armor. I stood lower, on the floor of the hall, exactly where I could be seen without being placed above anyone. Exactly where I could speak. My dress was dark green, simple, fitted, unadorned. The color made the last of my bruising stand out less. It made me feel real. Not ceremonial. Not offered. Kaelric didn't look at me until the doors opened. Marek Vane entered first. He did not arrive as the master of House Vane. He arrived flanked by Kaelric's guards, wrists bound in iron. His hair was still perfectly combed, his coat still expensive, but the illusion of his authority cracked under the weight of those chains. Behind him came Tavern Holt, unbound, but pale. He dressed as if for court, black suit, polished boots, crest pinned proudly at his chest. He looked like a man trying to convince himself the rules still belonged to him. When Tavern saw me, his eyes flicked over my dress, my posture, the lack of veil. A brief confusion passed across his face. Then calculation. Marek lifted his chin, trying to reclaim height that iron and humiliation had stolen. His gaze found Kaelric and sharpened. You have interfered in lawful union. Silence, Kaelric said. One word. Marek stopped speaking like his throat had been seized. Kaelric stepped forward, finally taking the seat on the dais with controlled ease. He didn't sprawl. He didn't perform dominance. He simply existed in it. You entered my lands to petition, Kaelric said. State your claim. Tavern drew in a breath, then spoke quickly, like a man afraid the courage would evaporate. I was publicly dishonored. The marriage contract between Holt and Vane was broken by force. I request restitution. His gaze cut toward me as if I were an object that had wandered. And the return of the bride. The hall went colder. My hands clenched. Kaelric's gaze did not move to Tavern. It went to Marek. You arranged the union, Kaelric said. Under what conditions? Marek's lips tightened. The girl is under my guardianship. She is Vane. She obeys Vane law. Kaelric leaned forward slightly. You mean she obeys you? Marek's eyes flashed. I preserved the house when her parents. Don't, Kaelric said, voice like ice. Marek stopped, but the hatred on his face burned brighter. Kaelric's gaze shifted at last, to me. Not to claim. To offer the floor. Alaris Vane, he said, clear enough for every ear. Speak. My heart hammered so hard it shook my breath. I stepped forward anyway. The sound of my boots on stone echoed louder than it should have. Marek watched me with warning in his eyes, old power reflex, the habit of intimidation. Tavern watched me with uneasy expectation, as if he still believed I'd play my role. I lifted my chin. The marriage was not agreed to, I said. Marek's mouth opened. Kaelric lifted one finger. Marek closed it again. I turned my head slightly so the torchlight caught the faint yellow of fading bruises at my jaw. On the day of the ceremony, I continued, voice steady, Marek Vane struck me in front of witnesses. A ripple went through the hall, low sound, anger contained. Marek's eyes widened in disbelief that I'd name it aloud. He did it to remind everyone I was owned, I said, letting the words land like stones. He did it because I resisted. My fingers lifted, showing my wrist. The bracelet gleamed cold in the torchlight. The runes etched into it looked wrong, too sharp, too deliberate. This binding was placed on me to prevent escape, I said. It's why I couldn't leave the estate. Why my body reacted when I tried. The healer in the crowd lowered her eyes. Kaelric's gaze darkened, but he did not interrupt. I looked at Tavern then. Held him there. And Tavern Holt, I said, watched. Tavern stiffened. I didn't let him speak yet. He looked away when I was struck, I said, each word clean. He chose silence. He accepted my humiliation because it benefited him. Tavern's voice rose, defensive. I didn't know he would. But you knew I didn't want it, I cut in, calm as I could manage. You knew I was afraid. You knew I had no choice. And you still came to the altar. You still stood there and waited to receive me. The hall held its breath. Because this was not a duel between men. This was a woman naming a crime that everyone had been trained not to acknowledge. Marek's face flushed. You ungrateful. Kaelric's voice snapped like steel. Enough. Marek flinched. Actually flinched. Kaelric stood. He did not shout. He did not threaten theatrically. He simply looked down at them, and the entire hall understood the difference between borrowed authority and inherent power. The union is void, Kaelric said. There will be no restitution for a contract built on coercion. Tavern swallowed hard. Then what of my pack's honor? Kaelric's gaze cut to him. Your honor was never offered here. Only your convenience. Tavern went pale. Kaelric turned to Marek. And you? Marek's chain rattled as he shifted, trying to regain composure. You can't. I can, Kaelric said quietly. Because you struck a woman under binding. Because you used law as a leash. Because you turned a wedding into a public punishment. Marek's eyes darted, searching for allies in the crowd. There were none. Kaelric's voice remained controlled, but the air around him felt charged, like a storm restrained behind a wall. You will be held, Kaelric said. Your council will be summoned. Your guardianship will be investigated. If your authority is proven to be built on fraud and violence, House Vane will be restructured without you. Marek's face twisted. You think you can rewrite bloodlines? Kaelric's gaze flicked to me, just once. I can rewrite cages, he said. Then he stepped back, and something in the hall released, a collective exhale that sounded like relief and fear tangled together. Kaelric turned fully to me. Now, he said, voice lowering so only I could feel how carefully he placed the words, the choice is yours. The hall quieted again, but not the same way the wedding crowd had gone silent. This silence was attentive, waiting. Kaelric lifted his hand, not toward me, not to touch, just open, offering. You may leave this territory with my escort, he said. To a neutral sanctuary. No Vane, no Holt, no council leash. My throat tightened. Or. You may stay, he continued. Not as property. Not as a prize. As yourself. His eyes sharpened. Under my protection, yes. Under my rules, yes. But with the power to build your own ground. He did not say as my mate. He did not say as mine. He waited. Waiting, I realized, was its own kind of dominance. Because it proved he could. I looked at Marek. The man who had made me small. I looked at Tavern. The man who had let it happen. Then I looked at Kaelric Thorn, Alpha King, storm in human form, restraint wrapped around hunger like iron around fire. I knew what leaving would mean. Safety, perhaps. But also running forever, carrying my past like a wound no one else could see. Staying would mean risk. Rules. A battlefield made of politics and instincts and a bond that tightened every time Kaelric breathed too close. But it would also mean this. I wouldn't be hidden again. I wouldn't be handed over again. I stepped forward until I stood beneath the dais, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the pull of something older than reason. I'm not staying because you saved me, I said, voice steady. Kaelric's eyes narrowed slightly, as if listening for the blade beneath the words. I'm staying, I continued, because I want to decide what I become. For the first time that night, something softened in his expression, not kindness. Recognition. Not of fate. Of choice. Kaelric exhaled slowly. The air between us tightened, electric. I won't claim you, he said, voice low enough that it felt like truth spoken against his own instincts. Not publicly. Not privately. Not until you ask. My breath caught. The bond, dormant, suppressed, denied, flared like a spark hitting oil. Heat ran through my veins. My wolf surged, not cowering this time, but rising. Kaelric's hand lifted halfway, then stopped, waiting, asking without words. I raised my own hand. Not to submit. To consent. I touched his fingers. The contact was brief, barely a brush. It felt like lightning. Kaelric went very still, as if the touch cost him more control than any threat or battle ever had. His eyes shut for a heartbeat, then opened again, dark, restrained, burning with something he refused to let become violence. The hall did not cheer. No one spoke. This wasn't romance for witnesses. It was an agreement made in the space between two people who understood power too well to treat it like a gift. Kaelric turned his gaze outward to the hall. Alaris Vane remains under my protection, he announced, voice carrying. By her choice. He did not add a possessive title. He did not mark me. He did not turn me into a symbol for his pack to worship or fear. He simply made space for me to stand in my own name. And in that space, something inside me straightened, something that had been bent for years. Marek stared at me like he couldn't comprehend it. Tavern looked away, finally ashamed. Kaelric looked down at me once more. Not like a hunter. Not like a savior. Like a king who had interrupted my destruction so I could choose what kind of ruler I would become beside him or apart from him. The wedding had ended in rupture. The reckoning had ended in selection. And the bond between us, controlled, dangerous, unfinished, had only just begun to burn. If this story caught your attention, subscribe so you don't miss the next tale.